Do anything else, Catherine,
Neither.
and I swear you'll regret it.
Not.
Sarah's voice was cold as steel, echoing through the damp chill of the stable. Her gaze locked onto her opponent, her left hand tightening
Neither.
around the worn leather reins. A
Not.
clean, sharp cut, like an undeniable accusation. To her right, Noah stood still, his cane tapping slowly against the wooden floor, eyes tracking every movement. At his feet, Atlas, the blind German shepherd with a white blindfold, sable and black fur streaked with silver at the muzzle, stood rigid, ears slightly folded, releasing a low growl that mirrored the tension in the air. The creak of the old beams blended with the steady rhythm of the cane, beat after beat, heralding the moment when everything might shatter. Late afternoon light slanted over the rolling hills of Willow Hill, Vermont, washing the dormant apple orchards in a pale gold that clung to every crooked branch. A breeze carried the faint scent of wood smoke from distant chimneys, a reminder that winter still held the land in its slow, stubborn grip. The Whitmore estate sat on the crest of the tallest hill, its sprawling farmhouse of weathered cedar and wide verandas framed by old maples. Beyond the barn and fenced paddocks, snow still clung in shaded pockets like forgotten lace. Sarah Collins stepped out of the taxi, the crunch of gravel under her boots breaking the hushed stillness. She was 28, tall and willowy, with a posture that seemed both deliberate and unpretentious. Her wavy chestnut hair fell just past her shoulders, slightly mussed from the wind, and her gray eyes held the kind of depth that made people pause. A mix of kindness and watchfulness, like she was always reading the unspoken. Years ago, Sarah had been a promising physical therapy student, winning a full scholarship to a well-regarded program in Boston. But when her mother's health collapsed after a sudden stroke, Sarah withdrew to become her full-time caregiver. Those years of tending to someone she loved had left her patient and empathetic, but also sharpened a quiet steel in her, the kind that came from watching life change in a single phone call. She was not afraid of hard days, but she had learned to recognize walls in people, and the Whitmores were known to have plenty. Waiting at the porch was David Whitmore. In his early 40s, David had the lean, broad-shouldered frame of someone who had once worked the land, but now spent most of his days behind closed doors. His short-cropped dark hair was threaded with early silver at the temples, his jaw square, his eyes an unyielding blue, the kind that measured people before they spoke. The tailored flannel shirt and worn leather boots suggested a man straddling the line between rancher and businessman. Since his wife's death 3 years prior, David's reputation in the small Vermont town had been that of a man who kept his distance, even from neighbors who had known him since boyhood. "Ms. Collins," David said, his tone clipped but polite. "You've met my mother, I assume?" Standing just behind him was Margaret Whitmore, 71, with a regal posture and the sort of presence that could quiet a room without raising her voice. Her silver-white hair was swept into a neat twist, her steel-gray wool coat buttoned to the throat despite the mild day. Her eyes were shrewd but warmer than her son's, and there was a faint smile at the corner of her mouth, as if she were privately amused by the awkward formality. "I have not," Sarah said, extending her hand. Margaret's grip was firm. "You're welcome here, Sarah," Margaret said, her voice smooth and deliberate. "It's good you've come." Inside, the farmhouse smelled, faintly of cedar and lemon polish. A long hallway led to a sitting room where the fire snapped softly. Near the window sat Noah. Noah Whitmore was 11, with hair the same dark brown as his father's, but messier, falling into eyes that were downcast, unreadable. He sat in a custom wheelchair, a wool blanket draped over his thin legs. Since a riding accident 6 months earlier, Noah had been unable to walk. The doctors had called it an incomplete spinal injury, not hopeless, but uncertain. He had withdrawn into silence, speaking only when necessary, and then only in short, flat sentences. Sarah's first instinct was to drop to his level, but she approached slowly, not wanting to crowd him. "Hi, Noah," she said softly. "I'm Sarah. I'll be here to help you with some exercises and whatever else you need." Noah shrugged without looking up. His hands toyed with a small leather strap in his lap, an old piece of horse tack, frayed along the edges. Sarah crouched beside his chair. "I'm going to check something, just for a moment. If you don't want me to, tell me." She gently pressed her fingertips along the arch of his right foot through the blanket. For a brief second, she felt the faintest twitch under her touch. A reflex, maybe, or something more? Noah's eyes flickered, just barely. "What are you doing?" David's voice cut in sharply from the doorway. Sarah straightened. "It's a sensory stimulation technique, harmless. I wanted to see—" "You were hired to assist with daily needs," David interrupted, his tone now edged with steel. "Meals, clothing changes, not to experiment on my son." Margaret stepped forward, her voice firm. "David, this isn't up for debate," David said, his gaze locked on Sarah. "We've had specialists from Boston, New York, even D.C. Nothing they tried worked. I won't have another person waltz in here thinking they know better." Sarah met his stare evenly. "I don't think I know better, Mr. Whitmore. I think Noah still has potential, and sometimes progress starts with something small. That's all." The air in the room tightened. Margaret's eyes narrowed, a silent warning to her son. "David, that's enough," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "You saw her touch him. You saw his reaction. That was more response than we've seen in weeks. You can't buy connection with a signature and a check." David's jaw flexed, but he said nothing more. From the far corner of the yard beyond the window, a movement caught Sarah's eye. Lying near the paddock fence was a large German shepherd, his fur a thick blend of sable and cream, marred by the absence of sight. Both eyes were clouded, and over his head was tied a clean white bandana that hung just above his brow, not as a decoration, but as a kind of gentle marker of his blindness. His ears, still sharp, swiveled at every sound, and his head lifted slightly as if listening for something familiar. "That's Atlas," Margaret said quietly when she noticed Sarah watching. "He's 9, used to be one of the finest herding dogs in the county. Saved Noah's life the day of the accident." Sarah glanced back at Noah. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his gaze fixed anywhere but the dog. "He hasn't had much to do with Atlas since then," Margaret continued in a low voice. "Feels guilty, I think." Noah asked his horse to run. The horse bolted. Atlas went after them. Got them both out alive, but lost his sight for good. Atlas shifted in the grass, lowering his head back to his paws. Even without sight, there was something noble in the way he held himself, as though the loss had not taken the shepherd out of him. The room was quiet again, except for the ticking of the mantel clock. David broke it with a curt, "Sarah, you'll have the guest room at the end of the hall. Margaret, please show her." As Sarah followed Margaret toward the stairs, she glanced once more toward the window. Outside, Atlas had turned his head toward the house, ears pricked as if he could feel the weight of her gaze. For just a moment, Sarah thought she saw Noah's hand twitch toward the glass, a small, almost unnoticeable movement, before he pulled the blanket tighter around his legs and looked away. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall farmhouse windows, spilling across the hardwood floors in long, amber streaks. Outside, frost still clung to the edges of the paddock fence, sparkling in the early light, but the air carried the faintest promise of spring. Sarah Collins rose early, tying her hair back loosely and slipping into a navy sweater and worn jeans, clothes chosen more for comfort than appearance. She had learned in her years caring for her mother that the work ahead would ask for patience, not style. Down the hall, Noah sat in his wheelchair by the kitchen table, a bowl of oatmeal cooling in front of him. His small shoulders were hunched, his gaze fixed on the condensation crawling down a glass of milk. David sat across from him, reading emails on a tablet. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. Margaret, at the stove, glanced at Sarah with a look that said more than words. "Try again." Sarah approached Noah slowly, crouching so her eyes were level with his. "I was thinking we could try something different today," she said. "It involves Atlas." Noah's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. "Atlas doesn't need me," he muttered. His voice was low, edged with something between guilt and defiance. Sarah glanced toward the mudroom, where Atlas lay curled on an old wool blanket. The German shepherd's sable and cream fur was clean but roughened with age. The white bandana over his clouded eyes gave him an oddly dignified air, like a veteran soldier carrying his scars without complaint. His ears twitched at the sound of his name, and his head lifted slightly, sniffing the air as if he knew he was being discussed. "Actually," Sarah said gently, "I think he does need you. And you might need him too." She waited a beat, then added, "If you want to prove me wrong, come out to the yard after breakfast." Noah didn't answer, but Sarah caught the tiniest flicker of curiosity in his eyes. An hour later, in the backyard, Sarah knelt beside Atlas. She took Noah's hand, small, cool, and guided it to the dog's broad back. "Feel how he shifts his weight?" she asked. Atlas took a step forward, slow and deliberate. "Now, guess which way he's turning." At first, Noah's guesses were hesitant, almost random. But then Atlas pivoted left, and Noah's hand followed the subtle tilt of muscle beneath the fur. "Left," Noah said softly. Sarah smiled. "Exactly." They repeated the game, Atlas stepping in short, careful arcs while Noah called out directions. Each time Noah guessed correctly, the boy's posture straightened a little more. And when his hand lingered too long in Atlas's fur, Sarah noticed something subtle. A faint twitch in Noah's toes under the blanket draped across his lap. She didn't point it out immediately. Instead, she let the moment settle, storing the observation in her small leather notebook later that afternoon. Over the next several days, they expanded the game. Noah would give Atlas a gentle tap on the shoulder, and the dog would respond, turning toward the sound. Margaret watched from the porch one morning, hands folded tightly, the ghost of a smile playing on her lips. David, however, remained distant. He often passed through the yard without stopping, offering only a nod before disappearing back into the house. Once, Sarah caught him watching from the upstairs study window, but when their eyes met, he turned away. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Sarah sat in her small guest room, reading over the day's notes. Through the half-open window, she heard a soft rustling, the muted pad of paws on gravel. Peering out, she saw Atlas slipping out of the gate, moving with surprising purpose for a dog without sight. His head was lifted, ears swiveling like radar dishes, steps deliberate. Curiosity prickled. Sarah grabbed her coat and stepped into the crisp night air, the moonlight laying silver ribbons over the fields. She kept her distance, careful not to let her boots crunch too loudly. Atlas moved down the old farm road, past the barn, and toward the rise of Willow Hill. The slope was steep in places, littered with half-melted snow and dead leaves, but Atlas navigated as though the path were etched into his mind. When they reached the top, the land opened to a wide clearing. Sarah stopped at the edge, her breath caught in the chill. She had heard about the place, the site of the riding accident. Faded hoofprints still marked the frozen soil in patches, and a broken section of fence leaned against the tree line. Atlas walked a slow, looping circuit, stopping now and then to sniff a particular patch of ground. He paused at the fence, pressing his muzzle to the splintered wood. His tail gave a slow, almost meditative wag. Sarah realized what she was seeing. He was mapping it again, step by step, using scent and memory instead of sight. She sank to a crouch, watching the dog retrace the same path 2, 3 times. When he finally turned toward her, his head tilted slightly, ears angled in her direction. She didn't move, but something in his stance made her think he knew exactly who she was and why she had followed. In that silent exchange, she understood. Atlas wasn't just walking the hill. He was preparing for something, rehearsing a path he might need again. And if Noah had been the reason for the first run-up here, maybe he was the reason Atlas came back, night after night. By the time they returned to the farmhouse, the moon was high, and the frost on the grass crunched underfoot. Atlas padded back to his blanket without fuss, curling into a tight ball. Sarah lingered by the mudroom door, glancing once toward the dim light spilling from under Noah's bedroom door. She wondered if the boy ever heard the soft jingle of Atlas's collar in the night, and if he did, whether it made him feel safer, or more, or afraid. She closed the door quietly behind her. The day Dr. Catherine Hughes arrived, the air over Willow Hill was brittle with the edge of oncoming snow. A pale sun clung to the horizon, as if reluctant to shine on what was about to unfold. Sarah noticed the black SUV winding up the gravel drive before she heard the crunch of its tires. She stepped onto the porch just in time to see Catherine emerge. A tall, angular woman in her early 50s with ash-blonde hair cut in a precise bob that swung sharply with each movement. Her coat was an expensive charcoal wool, cinched neatly at the waist, and her leather gloves fit as though tailored for her alone. There was a brisk efficiency in the way she moved, like she had stepped out of a city where time was money and warmth was optional. "David," Catherine said, striding forward to shake his hand. Her voice was low, controlled, with a faint accent from the upper northeast. Boston, perhaps. "It's been too long." "Good to see you, Catherine," David replied, his tone warmer than Sarah expected. "This is Sarah Collins, Noah's current caregiver." Catherine's eyes swept over Sarah, taking in her simple sweater, boots, and loose hair, with a polite but unmistakable air of appraisal. "Pleasure," she said, though it didn't sound like one. Noah was already in the therapy room, a converted section of the farmhouse with padded floors and parallel bars. Atlas lay near the wall on his blanket, head resting on his paws, ears twitching faintly. Catherine entered like a commander inspecting troops, her gaze moving from the bars to the resistance bands to Noah himself. "Let's begin," she said briskly, removing her gloves. "Noah, we're going to try standing with support. You'll need to bear more weight than before. It will hurt, but pain is not your enemy. Weakness is." Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but stopped at the sharp glance Catherine threw her way. At first, the exercises seemed manageable, Catherine guiding Noah's legs into position, instructing him to grip the bars. But as minutes passed, her demands grew. "Straighten, more, hold it, no, don't sit yet." Noah's face was pale, his lips pressed into a hard line. Sarah moved closer. "That's enough for now," she said gently. Catherine didn't look up. "He can do more." "He's 11, Sarah said, her voice tightening. "You're pushing him past the point of—" "Progress doesn't happen in comfort," Catherine cut in. The next repetition brought tears to Noah's eyes. His hand slipped slightly on the bar, and he gasped, unable to mask the pain. That was when Atlas rose suddenly, his ears forward, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He moved closer, the bandana shifting slightly as his head turned toward Noah. "No!" Catherine snapped, stepping between them. "Get that animal out of here. He's a distraction." Atlas barked, a sharp echoing sound that filled the room, and Noah flinched not from fear, but as if the bark had broken through some invisible fog. Sarah stepped forward, planting herself between Catherine and the dog. "Atlas stays." "Not in my session," Catherine said, her tone absolute. David's voice came from the doorway. "Sarah, please take Atlas out. Let Catherine finish." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she gave a short command to Atlas, leading him out into the hall. The German shepherd followed reluctantly, casting one last sharp bark back toward the room. By mid-afternoon, the promised snow arrived. At first it was a soft drift, but within an hour the wind had picked up, driving the flakes sideways against the windows. The sky darkened early, and by the time dinner was finished, the storm had grown into a full blizzard. The power flickered once, twice, then went out entirely. Margaret moved about lighting oil lamps, while David checked the generator in the barn. But when he returned, his expression was grim. "Generator's out," he said. "We'll have to make do with the fireplace until morning." The farmhouse chilled quickly. Sarah checked on Noah, tucking extra blankets around him. Atlas lay nearby, head resting against the wheelchair, his breathing steady. It was sometime after midnight when Sarah stirred from a light doze on the couch. She noticed Atlas was gone. The door to the mudroom stood ajar, letting in a curl of icy air. Panic surged. She grabbed her coat and stepped into the night, the snow already knee-deep in places. A faint trail of paw prints led away from the house, but over the howling wind, she heard something else. A faint metallic rattle. She followed it to the old horse barn, half buried in snowdrifts. Inside, in the dim beam of her flashlight, she found Noah. He had dragged himself halfway through the barn aisle, his hands red from cold, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Atlas stood beside him, pressing his body against the boy, as if shielding him from the worst of the wind sneaking through the cracked boards. "Noah!" Sarah dropped to her knees, pulling him into her arms. "What were you thinking?" "I heard Atlas go out," Noah whispered. "I didn't want him alone." Sarah didn't waste time scolding. She wrapped her coat around him and began hauling him toward the door, Atlas moving with them, one step ahead as though guiding the path. The wind outside was brutal, slicing through every layer of fabric, but Atlas pushed forward, head high, ears locked on the faint whistle Sarah made to keep his focus. By the time they stumbled back into the farmhouse, Margaret was waiting at the door, blankets and hot water ready. David stood just behind her, his face pale, not from the cold, but from something heavier. Later, after Noah was settled by the fire, David quietly pulled Sarah aside. "The security camera in the barn has a backup battery," he said. "I saw what happened. I saw how he followed Atlas, and I saw you bring him back." His voice was quieter now, the edges less sharp. Maybe there's more to this than I thought." Sarah didn't answer. Atlas was lying beside Noah again, one paw touching the boy's blanket, his chest rising and falling in the rhythm of deep sleep. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside, something had shifted. The storm had broken overnight, leaving Willow Hill wrapped in a cold, crystalline stillness. The snow was heaped high along the paddock fences, glistening under the pale morning sun. Inside the Whitmore farmhouse, the fire still crackled in the hearth, though the air carried the lingering chill of the night before. David stood near the window, watching Sarah pour hot tea into a mug. His usual guardedness was gone. In its place was something softer, almost contrite. "Sarah," he began, his voice low, "about last night, and about before that." He rubbed the back of his neck, searching for words. "I was wrong. I've been holding on to my own fear so tightly I didn't see what you were really doing for Noah." Sarah looked up from the mug, her gray eyes steady. "He's stronger than you think, David. He just needs someone to believe in him enough to meet him halfway." David nodded. "Then from today forward, you have full authority over his recovery plan. Whatever you need, resources, space, it's yours." His tone carried the weight of a decision made after a long internal battle. It didn't take Sarah long to sketch out a new therapy plan. This one wasn't just about Noah's legs. It was about his mind, his trust, and his sense of agency. The centerpiece was Atlas. Noah would guide the German Shepherd through a series of walking patterns using sound cues. A short whistle for forward, 2 clicks of the tongue for left, a soft tap on the cane for right. Atlas in turn would respond, and Noah would need to keep pace in his wheelchair, engaging his legs as they rolled forward, readying them for more weight-bearing in time. Margaret, who had been skeptical of unconventional methods in the past, surprised Sarah by offering help. "If it keeps him looking forward instead of back," she said, "then I'm all for it." But not everyone shared that sentiment. That evening, while returning from the supply shed, Sarah paused in the shadow of the mudroom door. Voices floated from the pantry, sharp whispers that didn't belong to the usual household bustle. "She's not qualified, Lucille," said Catherine, her tone crisp. "Sympathy doesn't rebuild muscles, and certainly not whatever she's doing with that dog." Lucille, the Whitmore family's long-standing housekeeper, stood shorter than Catherine, but carried herself with a certain practiced authority. She was in her late 50s, with tightly pulled-back hair streaked silver and eyes quick to judge. "David's blinded by what happened during the storm," she replied. "That girl's too close to Noah. It's not professional. We can convince him she's not suited for long-term care." Sarah's hand tightened on the doorframe. She stepped away before either could notice her. She didn't need to hear more. The intent was clear. 2 nights later, the air had shifted. Snow clouds had been replaced by a brittle, cloudless cold, the kind that made sound carry unnaturally far. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, updating Noah's progress notes, when Atlas lifted his head sharply. His ears angled forward, nostrils flaring. A low growl vibrated in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Sarah murmured. Atlas stood, moving toward the back door with a purposeful urgency. He stopped, turned his clouded eyes toward her, then nudged the doorframe with his nose. She grabbed her coat and followed him out into the frosty night. The moonlight painted the snow in shades of silver and blue. Atlas moved quickly despite the drifts, his paws finding sure footing until they reached the old horse barn. The air inside smelled faintly of hay and something sharper, metal maybe. Sarah's flashlight beams swept over the stalls, stopping at one in the far corner. Hanging from the stall door was a bridle, one she recognized instantly. It belonged to Jasper, the chestnut gelding Noah had been riding the day of the accident. Her breath caught when she saw the leather reins. They'd been sliced clean through, the cut fresh and deliberate. Her fingers hovered over the frayed edge. This wasn't wear and tear. Someone had done this with intention, and not for repair. The placement was symbolic, a cruel reminder of a day that still haunted Noah. Atlas stood beside her, the fur along his neck bristling, his nose pressed against her leg, as if urging her to leave before someone returned. Back inside, Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, the bridle now wrapped in an old towel. Her mind churned. Catherine's words in the pantry echoed in. The morning broke in a blaze of gold, sunlight spilling over the snow-blanketed fields like a benediction. The storm of recent weeks had passed, but a different kind of storm, quieter, heavier, was ready to break in the Whitmore family's life. Sarah Collins woke before dawn, her breath puffing faintly in the cool air of her small room. She dressed in her usual layers, a thick navy sweater, worn jeans, boots dusted with dried salt from trudging the winter roads, and tied her hair back. Today was the day she would put Noah's progress to the ultimate test. Outside, Atlas was already waiting in the yard. His sable and cream coat caught the morning light, the white bandana tied gently across his blind eyes, stirring in the breeze. Though age showed in the silver fur along his muzzle, there was a determined set to his stance. He seemed to sense the importance of this day. Noah emerged from the farmhouse slowly, supported by Margaret. His dark hair was combed neatly, and he wore a thick wool coat that looked a size too big, the sleeves bunching at his wrists. His face carried both apprehension and a flicker of anticipation. In his hands he gripped the handle of a specially made walking cane, its tip capped with a small bell to serve as Atlas's directional cue. David followed behind, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the packed snow. He wore a heavy brown overcoat and a look of restrained hope, as though afraid any visible excitement might jinx the moment. By mid-morning, several neighbors had gathered along the fence. Some brought thermoses of coffee, others carried folding chairs, their boots crunching on the icy ground. They came for different reasons: curiosity, support, or simply the promise of seeing something worth talking about for months. Sarah stood before the small crowd, her voice steady as she explained the game they were about to witness. "Noah will guide Atlas through a course of obstacles," she said, gesturing to the carefully arranged path. Overturned barrels, a narrow plank bridge over a shallow ditch, and a series of colored flags marking sharp turns. It's both a test and a celebration. He'll be standing, stepping, and steering, and Atlas will be his partner. Atlas waited at Noah's side, head tilted, ears alert to the faint jingling of the bell. Sarah gave a nod. "Ready?" Noah's first step was tentative, his hands gripping the cane tight enough to whiten his knuckles. The bell chimed softly, and Atlas stepped forward, leading him toward the first obstacle. At the barrels, Noah hesitated, his breath visible in the cold air. Sarah crouched a few feet away. "You've done harder things than this," she reminded him. Noah inhaled, shifted his weight, and stepped over the first barrel. Atlas slowed to match him, adjusting at the sound of the bell. The crowd murmured quietly, a ripple of warmth spreading through the cold morning. Halfway through the course, Noah's steps grew steadier. By the time they reached the plank bridge, his movements had taken on a rhythm. Step, bell chime, Atlas's guiding pace. The bridge wobbled under their combined weight, but Atlas pressed on, unshaken. The white bandana fluttered in the wind like a banner, and Noah's face broke into an unguarded smile. When they reached the final flag, Sarah called out, "Now turn and come back." The return trip was quicker, Noah's confidence building with every step. Margaret clasped her hands to her mouth, tears shining in her eyes. David stood straighter, his gaze fixed on his son. Noah crossed the finish point with a small but undeniable flourish, a final step that left both feet planted firmly on the snow. The crowd broke into applause, the sound carrying over the fields. David stepped forward, his voice carrying with a strength that silenced the clapping. "My son walks today not because I hired the best doctor," he said, looking directly at Sarah, "but because there were people who believed in him and refused to walk away." From the edge of the gathering, Catherine Hughes stood with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. When David's words settled, she turned without a word and began walking down the drive, her boots leaving sharp impressions in the snow. Lucille, standing nearby, lowered her gaze to the ground. After a long pause, she approached Sarah, her voice low. "I was wrong, about you, about all of it. I'm sorry." She didn't wait for a reply, but the heaviness in her tone spoke enough. The crowd dispersed slowly, neighbors offering warm handshakes and claps on the shoulder. But Sarah's mind was already on the final part of the day's plan. She turned to Noah. "One more walk," she said. This time, they didn't stop at the course. Together, Sarah, Noah, and Atlas made their way toward Willow Hill. The climb was gentle at first, then steeper, the snow thinning where the wind had swept it bare. The sun was dipping lower, staining the horizon with shades of rose and gold. At the crest, the fields opened up before them, glowing in the fading light. Atlas stood tall, his nose lifting to the breeze as if catching scents far beyond human reach. For a moment, his head tilted toward the sun, and though his eyes were clouded, his expression held a strange, serene awareness. As though in his mind's eye, he saw it clearly. Noah tightened his grip on the cane, then lowered it. "Let's go home," he said quietly, a smile tugging at his lips. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. Together, with Atlas between them, they walked back down into the valley, the sunlight spilling over their path like a promise kept. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not sudden flashes of light from the heavens, but quiet steps forward, guided by love, faith, and the courage to try again. Noah's journey was not just about learning to walk, but about walking into hope, and showing us that God often works through the hands and hearts of ordinary people, and even the loyalty of a faithful dog. In our daily lives, we all face moments when the path seems too steep or the night too long, but God is still there, whispering, guiding, and sending the right people into our lives at the right time. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a little faith today. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, and if you believe God still sends miracles into our world, type Amen in the comments. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story of hope, and may the Lord bless you and your loved ones with strength for every step ahead.